Hi, and welcome to the Complaining Cow Consumer Show on East London Radio with me, Helen, the Complaining Cow. Now, today with me, I have James Ball, who's a technology and security expert. Welcome, James.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, James is going to talk to me about AI and what's going on in the whole sector of AI. So bit difficult to know where to start, really, James. Where do you think would be a good place? Where are we with AI?
We're further along than most people think. So when people talk about AI, they're usually thinking either the Star Trek type, science fiction, or more recently, things like ChatGPT and deepfake models. There's actually a much wider world of AI, which we've been running along with for a long time. So automated decision making, for example, when your credit rating is decided on, that would be considered AI.
Right, so quite a lot. And of course, also we'd be hearing in the news this week about it being used in sort of doctor surgeries more. Tell me more a bit about that.
So there's different ways you can use AI, and the large language models such as ChatGPT, they are a very effective way of processing information. And if you've got the right expertise to sit behind that and ask it the right questions, it can be quite an effective knowledge engine. It can also be quite good at improving communication because it can rewrite and reframe things in much the same way as a copywriter might.
So do you think it will be a good thing in doctor surgeries or not?
I think it's going to be a mixed thing. There's definitely dangers. There's always risks when we bring in these sorts of artificial intelligence type tools, in that they can be biased. They can get things wrong. So that's referred to as hallucinating. And of course, when you're talking about medicine, that can be highly dangerous. So they're not something to be used without consideration and without the right safeguards in place, but they can have benefits as well.
Yeah, I think there are quite some concerns, aren't there, around how it's going to be used, and also sort of in with pharmacies and how that's actually going to happen. And will people be misdiagnosed? Do you think there's a lot of chance of that, or do you think that there is a lot more work to be done before anything will actually see anything really transpire?
I think the danger is that we don't know enough to say what the chance of that is. There's not been enough research done. And while with many areas that's less important, when we're dealing with something like medicine, the risks are high enough that you do want to be really, really sure before you bring in any tool that could have negative impacts.
What would you like to see happen before it's actually brought out or rolled out into doctor surgeries, for example?
I'd like to see the research done, so long-term evaluation of the dangers. I'd like to see the proper safeguards put in place, which would include expert review of any advice or any outputs that come from the AI. You don't want it recommending things and that just being taken as truth. And that is a genuine danger. People tend to trust machine decision making more than human, despite the fact that we know it's still got the same biases and can still make the same mistakes. So the safeguards and the long-term research, I think, are essential before we bring it in anywhere.
And let's just hope we get that. What do you think are the biggest concerns that we should have about AI? Obviously, you touched upon quite a few there, but what else do you think? About people thinking about, like, who talk about, oh, it's all getting a bit too sci-fi for me.
I can definitely understand that. The good news is I don't think we're in any risk of AI taking over the world, at least not deliberately. So Skynet isn't here yet and won't be. But there are risks of people trusting it too much. As I mentioned about the medicine, this applies other places as well. There's also dangers where bias is built into AI by the nature of the way that we build and train it. So there's been instances in the US, for example, where a artificially intelligent parole system gave racially biased decisions on whether people could have parole or not. There's issues with facial recognition and all sorts of other things. So we build these biases into these systems without fully understanding what we're doing, and without doing the evaluation to check whether they're there. They can just remain there and become part of the truth of this decision making.
So it's really quite a danger, isn't there? Really. I mean, are people right to be worried?
Yes. No, people are absolutely right to be worried. I wouldn't say we necessarily need to be scared, but it is a disruptive technology. It is a significant change, and it's been building slowly for a while. What's happened recently is it's become much more public. So the capabilities have increased, the amount of funding going into it has increased, and the use cases for it have massively expanded from where they were just a few years ago.
What do you think people can do?
Recognise that it's a complicated area. It's neither absolute evil, it's not going to conquer the world and exterminate humanity. Equally, people have to recognise it's not pure good. There are negatives to it, there are consequences, many of them we haven't seen. So it's a nuanced, balanced discussion that's really needed, and that discussion needs to be happening at levels where, frankly, it's not at the moment. There's a lot of hyperbole and not much conversation and not much nuance at the levels where we need it.
How do you think it all sort of fits with the GDPRs, which I suppose I should explain to sort of people as the data protection rules?
It's complicated because the way that it comes down to different AI models, so different ones will do different things. The most popular one at the moment is the ChatGPT engine, and that's had issues with data protection in quite a big way, in that it's leaked conversations between different users, it's suffered several data breaches already, it's been banned in a certain European country because they've not got, or they're not considered to have the appropriate privacy protections in place. So there's definitely complications with it. There's other similar technologies which have been around for a while, which are also in conflict with GDPR, but there hasn't been the drive to do anything about them. So digital twin is an example, and digital twins are digital models of objects or people in order to predict their behavior under different circumstances. The most common use of digital twin modeling for people is in social media to build up advertising profiles and work out the type of advertising that will work against you. Now, whether or not that's personal data, because it's sort of anonymized, but you could easily identify someone from it and it gets very personal, that's still up in the air, and that's still a discussion that they're having at those legislative levels.
So on that note, we're seeing the CMA, the Competition Markets Authority, doing something, but again, it all looks complicated. Can you explain what it is that they're actually looking at?
Yeah, so what they're looking into is the fact that these large language models specifically, the foundation models behind them, those are the ones that swallow up as much data as they can and then generate new data off the back of that. They give a fairly large competitive advantage, and there could be competition implications there, which is obviously where the CMA are most concerned. So they want to make sure there's not potential monopolies emerging and competition issues.
What kind of competition issues do you think could arise?
An example would be a company who build a large language model, a significantly large one, and simply by virtue of being first and having the largest, establish themselves as a de facto monopoly. So Microsoft decades ago were in a similar place by bundling technology together, and there were various cases that went on there. I suspect it's a similar thing here. The first person to get something to market is going to have a huge advantage, and without something to redress that and make sure others can still rise up and be in competition, that could become dominant.
So do you think the CMA will do enough? Have they got in early enough to prevent anything happening?
They probably haven't got in early enough because there's already significant movement here. There's also the fact that any of these agencies, any regulatory agency, tends to move quite slowly. And they have to, because they have to do due diligence, they have to properly understand what they're doing. But the people building these tools, they aren't showing any indication they care about caution or safeguards or even ethics. They just want to get tools to market as quickly as possible. And so the problem that's going to arise here is there is no way that regulators and legislation is going to keep up with the technology.
Which brings us back to getting worried again, doesn't it?
Yeah, there is plenty of reason to worry.
So what would you like to see happen more in that regulatory area?
I would like to see regulation that will actually hold the companies who are ploughing ahead with this without considering these issues to account for their lack of priorities around ethics. I mean, we've recently seen from Google, for example, one of their main AI experts has stepped down a few years ago. They fired their AI ethics department. We're not talking here about companies considering these things carefully. So I would like to see something that pushes them to do that and holds them accountable when they don't.
Will we be in trouble, or how will it affect us when AI sort of in other countries when we come to use platforms that are not in the UK?
There's going to be issues around the data protection side of that. Less so for us because we're no longer protected in the same way under GDPR. So unless you're going into the EU, only the UK version will apply, and that's harder to enforce outside of the UK. But there are more and more of these cross-border data protection rules coming in, and they're going to be in massive conflict with national AI projects designed to inspect and look at individuals. It's going to be a mess, is my best answer there.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was sort of then alluding to. Is like actually, I mean it is just, I mean it is a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an incredibly complicated, tangled web where large parts of it are moving incredibly fast and other parts are desperately trying to cling on and say slow down. I'm not sure what the solution is, or even if there is one, but I do think it's important to be having the conversation and for people to be aware of what's going on.
How do you think government are looking at this?
Some parts of government are looking at it as an opportunity and will be racing ahead with it. Others, the CMA review, as an example, I think that's a good sign. It's not necessarily an effective sign, but it's a good one that there are people taking the more considered approach. But government itself, it's not a monolithic entity. There will be different views in different areas. There will be some departments who are just seeing opportunity, others who are just seeing risk, and then others who will be having arguments internally about which one they need to present and face up to.
So yeah, again, more complications and more concerns about. I mean, you can just see how things can go wrong in just about every single sector of society, really, can't you? It's quite concerning.
Yeah, the danger is when we're dealing with these sorts of technologies, things that go wrong can go wrong very quickly and on a massively large scale. So when we're dealing with things that move slower, if someone gets something wrong, there's going to be time to change that, to row it back. When we're dealing with these sorts of technologies, there isn't the time to do that because it's already moved on by the time you've done that review. If you take 3 months to do a review, and we know that they're normally multiple years, then you're dealing with a whole new generation of this technology.
And then we start all over again.
Exactly.
Well, I mean it is fascinating, but it is complicated. I mean, you know, my mum, for example, is just like, oh, AI is coming into the doctor. Is that just going to make it more difficult? I can't even get to see my doctor anyway. Is that going to make it even more difficult? So actually, it's really worrying people quite a lot.
Yeah, and it should do, because the answer is if it's going to potentially save money or make money for someone, then yes, it will make your life more difficult, because the priority is to make your life easier.
I think it's very problematic. I'm not sure what we're going to do. I mean, what are your other thoughts about it?
Well, these are issues that have been going on for a while. It's just that recent events have brought them much more to light. But for example, we've had there's been an AI model called Replica out there for a few years now. And there are people who've built very close and romantic relationships with their AI using this application. So there's issues around that and the ethics of that, and whether you can essentially sell AI as a person, as a partner to people, and what problems that might cause. We've got the automated decision making. Now, you mentioned about GDPR. There is a provision under the GDPR to appeal any decision which is taken in a fully automated way. That is very rarely used, but it is something people should be aware of, because there's going to be more and more of that automated decision making. Companies have a legal responsibility to allow you to appeal it and to explain how they took that decision.
And the trouble is, I think people, because I mean, I see obviously all the time that people don't know their consumer rights. And so, you know, they get fobbed off with taking their kettle back. So they might get fobbed off and said, you know, actually, you've got to go to the manufacturer, when that's not true. And that's, you know, the basics of consumer rights. So if people don't know those, they're certainly not going to know the rules under the GDPRs. And that again is worrying again, because people won't actually complain about it because they won't know how or what their rights are.
Yeah, and it is important. I mean, mortgage decisions, credit cards, all of these things are now automated decisions, largely. There's usually a person inserted somewhere in the process at a very token level to tick a box so that it's not a solely automated decision, which is a loophole in the law. But if they're just ticking a box, then they don't have any influence on it, and that doesn't actually fulfill the requirements. So knowing what you can do about appealing automated decisions is going to be very important.
It is, isn't it? I think that might be another blog post for you, James, as to how you appeal decisions that have been made like this. It is so difficult just to simplify and break down all of these parts where AI appear, isn't it? Because I mean, you could list off probably all the different places where AI is being used that probably we don't know about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are a lot of those places. And partly it's because people don't really understand what AI is, because we've explained it very badly over the years. But to take an example, if you have a digital camera or the digital camera on your phone, there is an AI engine in that working to improve your pictures and take the best possible picture. So that is AI adjusting light levels and everything else. And it's completely transparent and invisible to the user, but it just shows how commonplace these technologies are.
Yeah. And it doesn't register, does it? That's AI. Hadn't to me. It hadn't registered, because you think of AI as the chatbots. I think most people would think of the AI as chatbots and sort of conversations are sort of, you know, online and websites. So I think it just makes it so complicated. I'm not sure where where people can go with it, really. It is really sort of waiting for seeing what regulators, you know, and government do, isn't it?
Yeah, there's very little people can do about it. It's knowing your rights around automated decision making is going to be key. Understanding the data protection aspects enough to be able to say, I think that's a bit wrong, and do something about it. And beyond that, it's just preparing and trying to work out how to live with this, because we're going to have to.
That's it, isn't it? We are going to have to learn to live with it. I think you're right, and it is going to be the way of the world, and we're going to have to just accept it, I think, and hopefully the good will outweigh the bad.
That's the hope. It's
We can't but hope.
When it's used the right way. It really is.
I mean, tell us maybe some more positive things, how you can see it being used more positively in maybe the next 5-10 years.
Car safety would be an example. So it's already in place there and will become more and more so, helping people to drive safer.
Do you think we'll have flying cars?
I don't think flying cars are likely to happen, and self-driving cars are, well, there's a reason that the vast majority of engineers working on self-driving cars won't get into a self-driving car. But more effectively, when we look at communication between people, there was a lovely example I saw where a plumber who has dyslexia was using AI in order to rewrite his messages to clients. So his messages were already fairly casual and had spelling mistakes and various other things. It's allowed him to communicate in a much more professional way, which is winning him more business. So there's definitely potential there to enable people and empower people to do things. There is definitely positive out of it. It's just keeping an eye out for the negative and making sure that's reined in.
I think it's like anything, isn't it? It's like any new invention. They're always the downsides of anything, aren't there? You know, whatever there's ever been, there's always some downsides. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. There'll probably be a lot of jobs in this area. Do you think it will be a growing? I'm just thinking of my son, who's quite likes computers and stuff. Would that be a growing a need for his skills?
See, that one I'm not sure about, because there is an aspect to this which is the same sort of hype and excitement we've seen around other technologies. and that's then failed to materialize, and they've sunk down later on and disappeared largely from public consciousness. So I can see that while it's very exciting for people at the moment, it may just become part of life, and there will be jobs in it, but they will be more maintenance type jobs rather than the really exciting stuff.
Of the creation.
Exactly.
Yeah, until the next thing comes along. What what will be the next new thing in 10 years' time? Because there will be something, won't there?
Oh, absolutely. And I suspect it'll be in 5 years' time at most.
Any idea what you think it might be?
None whatsoever. If I could predict it, then it would be too predictable.
You would be a very rich man if you were working on something. I mean, what do we think? I suppose it's how long's a piece of string? What do we think people are working on in all these computer little places?
I mean, we could talk about space travel, but I don't think that's likely. When we're talking about these AI engines, there is the potential for a new model to come out, because they do change. And when I say model here, I mean the framework and the methods on which they're based. So currently the most popular ones, they're what are called neural networks, which are essentially digital models of theoretically the way we think the brain works. But there could be something else discovered. No idea what it might be. It's just odd that might be the best possible solution to replicate something we already know rather than develop something new.
We need a film, don't we? Like, Back to the Future, because didn't that predict quite a few things that happened? The hoverboards.
I mean, Star Trek predicted AI.
Yeah.
So they were ahead of their time as well.
So maybe we need to be watching the filmmakers to see what's on the horizon.
Sci-fi authors are the ones I recommend. They've got some very good stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, and that brings us back sort of full circle, doesn't it? Back to around, people worrying about, is it getting very sci-fi?
We've been living in a sci-fi world for years already. If people haven't picked up on that, then they need to pay a bit more attention.
Are there aliens on another planet, James?
Oh, on that one, I've got absolutely no idea.
Another story for another day. Well, thank you so much for casting some light on some of the issues, because it is a very complicated area. So thank you very much for joining us today, or joining me today.
Anytime. Sorry, I couldn't give some easier answers.
Well, I think, the answer is it is complicated, and we've got to keep our eye on the ball, I think, isn't it, really? It's the bottom line.
Yeah.
So please tell me where people can find you.
So easiest place is LinkedIn. I can be found on Twitter as well under coffee_fueled. I run a family business called Boars, which is at boars.com. And I also do a bit of work teaching people to do public speaking on securethestage.com.
And that's brilliant. And everything will be on the blog for people. So thank you for listening. And if you have a topic you'd like me to discuss on the show, you can email me on helen@eastlondonradio.org.uk. And you can find me on my website, thecomplainingcow.co.uk. And for information on consumer issues, including your rights, money saving matters, and all the other episodes of The Complaining Cow Consumer Show on East London Radio, on that site. And you can find me on Twitter @ComplainingCow and @TheComplainingCow on Instagram and Facebook. And you can get 15% off my books with ELR Cow code for How to Complain, the Essential Consumer Guide to Getting Refunds, Redress and Results, and 101 Habits of an Effective Complainer. See you next time. Many thanks. Bye.